Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. Really good to see you this evening for a conversation about Oracy, which has become, it's always been a hot topic, but particularly with the commission and various other things happening, it's gone front and center once again. I feel like everything goes front and center in education. Maybe it's cyclical, but everything comes around again. But really excited to have a conversation about Oracy this evening, and Oracy in schools, in classrooms, and we're going to touch on curriculum. We're going to touch on lots of things. And I've got a fantastic guest, which is Louise. Louise, welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. How are you this evening?
Hello, thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Excellent. Tell me, before we kick off, a little bit about your current role and what you're up to in your professional work.
Okay, currently I'm at Weavers Academy in Wellingborough. I'm head of social sciences. I have a relatively small team. We teach psychology, sociology and health and social care, both at Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5. Aside from that, I'm also leading some teaching and learning work at the moment through an SSAT project as part of my own professional development. And that's kind of where the Oracy focus is coming from at this point.
Fantastic. What got you into Oracy? Because you when we were chatting the other week, you straight away you said Oracy's the one. Oracy's my thing. So what got you into Oracy?
Well, to be honest, I think I didn't know much about it. I think, when you train as a teacher, I trained about 16 years ago. I didn't really feel like it was at the forefront of the profession at that point. Well, it definitely wasn't in my course. It was just kind of like a given, and we didn't discuss it as a separate thread of teaching and learning. And so I hadn't really given much credence to the idea until I went to a research ed, which our trust, the Creative Education Trust, hosted in Milton Keynes back in October. And I met an external consultant called Simon Day, and he was an Oracy specialist. And I was kind of volunteering at the event, helping people go to their talks, kind of showing people around the building where to go. And it was my first research ed. And I just happened to sit with Simon at lunchtime. And I said, who are you? Lovely to meet you. What is it you do? And he said, well, I was an English teacher and now I'm an Oracy specialist. And I said, what is this? Talk to me about what Oracy is. And we chatted over lunchtime. He said, well, come along to my talk in the afternoon. I'll tell you what it is. I'll tell you why it's important for teaching and learning. Lo and behold, popped along, found out what it was, the importance in the classroom. And I literally had that moment where I sat there and reflected on my own practice and thought, light bulb moment. Little bit embarrassing. I've been talking way too much in my classroom and I've not allowed my students to speak. And somewhere along the way, I started teaching as a facilitator. I think that was the words that we used back when I was training. And so it was about, kind of like paired work or group work, which was more Oracy focused, although we didn't actually specifically talk about it. Whereas I think with really rammed syllabi, you then just kind of, a lot of people fall into that trap, which I did. Whereas I've got to get through the content. And I even had students, particularly in my psychology and sociology classes at Key Stage 5 saying, Miss, this is so exciting. Can't we talk about this? Can't we debate this? And I'm like, nope, no time. It was when I had that conversation with Simon, I thought, hang on a second, I'm missing a trick here. Like, this is something I should be in building. And it's not just for academic assessment outcomes. Why am I not letting my students speak? And so that was my moment where I went away and thought about it. And at Weavers, we've kind of brought in the SSAT programs at different levels. So we've got the pastoral program, we've got the aspirant senior leaders program, which I've just completed. And with that training, we basically said we want to do a project. And they said, what would you like to do? And I thought, well, because I need to work on this myself. And I have a feeling if this is relevant for me and my students, it might be something that could help other staff. And so kind of that's where the inspirations come from.
Sure, we'll come on to the project in a minute. Before we get into that, it's interesting you said about the allowing students to speak. Do you think, I have that same issue. It's partly because of the the nature of how much there is to cover. It's partly because I tend to spend quite a long time explaining things. And I feel like I almost want to check the students understand as I'm going through, which means that explanations maybe take a little bit longer than they should. But the third reason, and this applies more, basically the lower down the key stages you get for me, and that classroom management. Because I sometimes feel like if I allow long periods in the lesson for the students to talk, that requires its very own management from a teaching point of view. If the teacher's talking, I'm saying this is almost a weakness in a lot of teaching that's going on, I guess. But one of the problems is if the teacher's talking, that's probably the easiest place to manage and control the class. If you are talking at the students. If the students are working in groups or pairs, or even if the students are talking to you, that's harder to control and manage, just because it is. Because I'll tell you why, because if you've got 30 students in the class and it's you speaking as the teacher for an extended period of time, not for 10 seconds, but I mean for minutes we're talking now, it's much more chance they're going to listen to it's probably more chance that most of them are going to listen more to the teacher than Jenny, who's been talking for 2 minutes about something. That's just the nature of it. Yeah. Unless Jenny's talking to them as a friend about, something that was on Netflix the other week or something, right? So that's where I'm coming from with it. So I'll be interested to dig into that with you in terms of what you discovered about Oracy and whether those sort of things apply to you and maybe they didn't. But if they did, I'd be interested how you sort of tackled that.
I think there is. I think you're right, and I think you've touched upon something really important. Staff, some staff are quite frightened. I say frightened, it's not the right word. Reluctant to relinquish what they see would be some kind of control of the classroom. But actually, the way to kind of counteract that is to make sure that your Oracy opportunities are really structured, so students don't have a chance to deviate. And I think that's something I learned this year, kind of looking into Oracy and how you should bring that in. I think I often fell into the category where it'd be like, okay, I've delivered a concept, I've modeled it on the board, I've given you success criteria. Now I'd like to make sure you've consolidated that information by discussing it with the person next to you. Off you pop. And I'd pop a time on the board for like 5 minutes. And you're quite right. What would then happen is you'd get some really conscientious students that would, talk about that. But then they wouldn't be extending their knowledge because you hadn't given the tools to then extend that conversation. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got some students that were really, really reluctant. You'd have some students with heads on desks, God forbid, or some students, like you say, talking about Netflix. Because again, you haven't given them the structured tools to have the conversation. So I think if we are going to think about bringing Oracy as common threads into each lesson, regardless of subject, regardless of teacher and students, it needs to be something that's structured and it's pre-planned and it's consistent and a routine. Because then it becomes a psychologically safe space where students know what's coming. They know that they're going to be given the vocabulary they should be using. They know they're going to be given, for example, in a turn and talk, they're going to be given a specific role allocation. And in that role, they're either adopting a character. For example, they might be a critical friend, or they might be someone just kind of explaining a concept and talking a theory through. And if you're giving them the structured sentences you want them to essentially complete, it's really hard for them to deviate. And you can then circulate as a teacher listening to the conversations. And the nice thing is it then lends itself really well. If you structure their turn and talk or even the group discussion, because you've got roles you've assigned with specific sentence starters, you know what you're listening out for. It's then easier to assess their understanding. And they also then push each other. So for example, you can then think about your stretch and challenge, particularly if you're in Key Stage 4, your 7 to 9 students, or at Key Stage 5, your B to your A star students. you can then think about, okay, is there specific vocabulary you would now like them to use? When it comes to having a paired conversation, you've got one is describing a theory and one's the critical friend. What extra question would you ask the critical friend to ask their partner? Because that will be the stretching question that a teacher would ask, but the student then asks their partner. And so there's a different kind of power play in that situation. There's a sense of ownership, because the second you get students asking the right questions, they then understand why they're asking the questions, and they can understand the success criteria better from the answers they're then looking for.
Perfect. I mean, what do you see Oracy as in the classroom? Is it to you the act of the students talking, or does it matter what they're saying?
So Oracy, I think there's a common misconception of what Oracy is, that it's just spoken. It's also about listening skills and about communication, be that verbal and non-verbal. So I think when we're talking about Oracy, it's not just a speaking element. It's also things like active listening or generous listening, or thinking about our posture, our stance, our intonation, paraphrasing back so that people, they know we know what they've said, and then building on that. But I think Oracy is one of those things, it's not just students, it's also staff. And I think we need to be starting with staff first and then taking that out to the students, because we should be modelling and proactively saying to our students, I'm working on my Oracy today, my Oracy skills. I know that I haven't been particularly strong with exposition, explaining how this links to our previous learning, what the bigger picture is. So in today's lesson, that's what I'm going to be working on. And I'd really like your feedback on how well I've done that, because then the staff member actually gets to develop their own Oracy, and students see the value in it because we're working on it too.
Sure. I mean, tell me about this this project then you carried out, because I am interested. It's like an Oracy project you work at Weavers Academy. So, what inspired? You've already mentioned what inspired it. It was part of a leadership qualification and so on. But what did you actually do, and what did you, what were the challenges of this, and what did you find out?
So obviously the first book was, I was kind of speaking to Simon. I was doing my own research, finding out what Oracy actually was, what the evidence was, because I didn't want to go and design a project just for the sake of doing a qualification. It needed to be meaningful, and I wanted it to be meaningful for other staff and not just me, and also for students.
Well, let's
and we've been working on.
You might not know this, but what is the evidence and research on it? If you don't know it off the top of your head, don't worry. But I'm presuming there is.
So this is something I'm kind of. Oh yeah. So in recent years, I think Oracy, we've got things like the Oracy Commission, and we've got lots of organisations who, like Oracy Shift and things, are kind of talking more about it. The government has in recent years just been talking about it indirectly through things like English subject reports. One came out last year in 2024 in March saying that there wasn't enough focus on oral composition, that it's not being designed into curricula effectively. But I think in the past, it's been focused just on English as a subject. And it's like, no, this needs to be happening in all subjects. But I am currently in the process of delving more deeply into it at the moment. So yeah, there are obviously frameworks have come out for how we can be designing this and how we can be in building this. But I think it's, like you say, it's at the forefront. It's coming to the forefront now. So more research is kind of coming in. And I know, we're taking part next year as a school, and I know a lot of other schools are taking part into an inquiry project led by an external provider to kind of gather more research in schools, because we can talk about Oracy as a national focus, and we know what it is and why we're doing it and how we would assess its impact. But it actually needs to be something that is specific to schools and context and our students. And so that's why these kind of local inquiry-based projects will be really insightful, because we need more of that in the research domain, I think.
Sure. Okay, so go on. Tell me about the project then. Tell me about the recent work that you've carried out at your academy on this.
So initially we had a conversation with Simon and talking about, we were quite clear that we wanted, whilst the research was important for me as a leader to kind of understand, I wanted that to be very, very practical and pragmatic for staff. I think we started the project in January. It'd been planned before, but it actually came to fruition in the January and spanned all the way into July. So we built the Oracy team. It was a pilot project originally. So it was the psychology department in social sciences, it was the history department and English. We wanted to pilot it first because, as I said, it was midway through the year, but we did embed it into our current CPD programme. So the project itself wasn't just Oracy, it was Oracy and modelling. We've been focused on that for the past couple of years as a key thread. So the I do, we do, you do. And we were focusing particularly on the I do and we do aspects, the first two stages, thinking about how can we inbuild Oracy opportunities there so that students then effectively equipped to go to the you do stage. Well, then go and go in written independent practice. And essentially it's like, okay, now you show me what you can do, obviously guided. But so that's kind of how we inbuilt it. We had two training sessions with Simon, excuse me, where he basically gave us specific resources, tools, things like the Freighter model. There were other specific resources that he designed for us where it would take you through a structured lesson, and we could then adapt it to our departments and our students, using the resource, designing the PowerPoints as we wanted them to guide students through those stages of I do, we do, then into you do. So that's kind of where the project was. It wasn't a standalone project. We wanted to weave it in to our focus. And I think that's really important in Oracy. I think we can, particularly as you said, we're talking about it a lot at the moment. It shouldn't be something that's separate. It shouldn't be a separate CPD thread for teaching and learning. It should be something woven into what we're already doing. So Simon came and initially did baseline. We did baseline assessments for our students. So at GCSE, we focused on year 10 in all of those three areas. And we basically, for quantitative data purposes, we gave them baseline for an extended exam answers. For example, in psychology, that would be a 13-mark essay. And then we also did staff and student voice for more of the qualitative aspect. Simon then obviously did learning walks in line with our Weaver's Way and how we kind of assess things like exposition and explicit instruction. And he fed back, and we've then built in all the tools and resources that he's asked us to use. He's then come back in, done more learning walks, assessed them. We've then compared the data to more quantitative data we've sat in the last couple of weeks, as well as staff and student voice. So we've got now a comparative set of data for report purposes to see the impact.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Capel Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to capelprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
So the impact was, I'll start with the quantitative data side. So in all three subjects, there was an increase of at least, on average, 2 marks per student. And to put that into context, for history, it was out of 12. For psychology, it was out of 13. And I think for English, it was out of 20. It was higher banding. In terms of staff voice, there was a lot more buy-in with the impact of Oracy at the end than there was at the start. So your questions like, do you feel like it's important in the classroom? Do you feel like it's something that's important to you to develop? Do you think it's going to have a big impact on students? Staff voice drastically increased in confidence with that data. Student voice, I think there were some mixed results. But I think it's because we've got one of those situations where we'd only been doing it for about 7 months, and that needs to be something that's more extended. So we have built them into routines, into our lessons in those 3 subjects, and there has been positive student data come from that. But that needs to be, I think, assessed more and taken more into the next academic year for us to get more valid data on that. But we did
Sure.
have comments like students in year 10 psychology saying things like, oh, we definitely speak more, we have more opportunities to speak. I feel like speaking through, for example, the process of synaptic transmission, then drawing a diagram at the same time, they then can actually write it in an exam answer more effectively. So it has been positive.
Got you. And I wanted to ask, just in terms of your teaching yourself in the classroom over the last 7 months, or let's just say with an increased focus on Oracy, how's your teaching changed then? Give me some examples of what you're doing differently. I know you've already touched on it, but give me some more examples. You know, make it practical to a teacher out there. Sort of what that looks like.
So I plan the Oracy opportunities in. I think previously I would just do that thing where I'd explain a concept, I'd give my example, I'd ask them for examples. We'd talk about it a little bit, but it wasn't structured because I hadn't planned it in advance. I hadn't necessarily planned my questions. They pop into my head, I'd ask them. Those questions weren't really stretching students. They weren't allowing students to give extended answers to improve their Oracy. I wasn't, aside from presentations, I wasn't commenting on students' non-verbal body language. That wasn't something we ever discussed. I think when we do presentations, it's quite natural to say, oh, you know, look at us, maintain eye contact, you know, stand up straight, face us, take some pauses. We do that in presentation work, or at least I had, but we don't do loads and loads of presentations because it takes a long time for students to do. And we just don't have that many hours to kind of put the syllabus in. So I then have extended that in. So for now, when I ask students to do group activities where they've been assigned roles or paired activities, not only do they have sentence starters and assigned roles, they also are given success criteria to reflect on their own verbal and non-verbal body language and cues. And they get to kind of reflect as a pair. So you can do it more privately if they don't want to share, you know, so they have a chance to specifically, overtly say, I felt like my posture was good. Because, I mean, we all know this. There have been times in some of our lessons where we say, oh, turn and talk to your partner. And you've got two students like this. And you're like, no, you actually need to turn to face your partner, though. And they're like, why? Or you get one student that faces, you get one student that's like, oh, I'm tired, head on desk. And I mean, we always say to them, you know, lift your head off the desk. But it's not consistent. It's kind of a negative sanction at that point. It's not a positive baseline expectation. You need to be facing your partner. So there's more overt conversation about communication techniques that I hadn't previously done, as well as the specific activities that I've planned in.
Got you. I mean, I totally agree that probably there is more focus on what students are saying rather than how they're interacting with what someone else is saying. So, yeah, I mean, I'm probably guilty of that, certainly. And what you said about presentations, taking time and stuff like that. I mean, absolutely. I mean, you talked about planning it in, which I totally get. In terms of the curriculum time constraints, do you sort of, you know, do you not feel under pressure to sort of bin some activities and just power through and sort of, you know, because, you know, you mentioned, obviously you've done this project and you've mentioned there's going to be more research coming, I'm sure, and there'll be lots of it because of the renewed focus on Oracy. There'll be lots of studies coming out and stuff like that. I get that. But ultimately, if as a teacher, your instinct can sometimes say, if I do chalk and talk, if I do, you know, something more traditional, if I do something more simple, will that get the students better exam results at the end?
I think it depends, though, on what it is that you're wanting students to do. I think you also need to kind of change the lens that you're viewing it through, because we think it would be quicker if I did it. Yeah, no, yeah, of course. I think if we view it through that lens, it'd be quicker if I did it and I just said it. It would be quicker, but they wouldn't learn it any better. They're not going through the cognitive stages that they need for that to actually really embed. So you're right, and I can see where you're coming from. It is, and that's something, like I said, that I've been doing for the past few years, where I'm just like, I've got to cram it in. I'll just talk at them and hope that it's gone in, answer the occasional question, they'll have some notes and we'll do some exam practice. But then when you inevitably get the exam practice, the outcomes aren't where they could be because they haven't really consolidated it, because they haven't really worked with the concept or the skills that you've just taught them. So it's about changing the way that you see it. And I think that's why the planning is important. And also the planning of things like the questions you're asking, that's a really quick win, because I think for me, I sometimes fall into the habit of just saying, oh, you know, what date did this happen? What was the name of the psychologist that did this study? And they'll tell me, and I'm like on mini whiteboards sometimes, and I'm like, woo, class has got it. That's not really deep and meaningful knowledge. They haven't really done anything with that knowledge. And what did the study do? What did the study say? Why was it significant? These are the extended communication opportunities that I'm cutting out. So I think the planning bit, even if you're going to do quick wins, just planning the questions that you're going to ask, and about when you're planning them, thinking about the misconceptions that they're already going to have or probably going to have when you ask those questions. Or even asking students, what questions would you ask? What would you ask someone else? So you kind of give the onus on the student to come up with the questions, because then they have to really think about the material to then think about what questions to devise.
Yeah, got you. Just before
What do
we
you
carry
think?
on, what do I think? I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
I think, you know, what you're saying everything you're saying really makes perfect sense to me. I do think it's been a neglected area. The bit I want to move on to in a minute is some of the interesting stuff we talked about prior to this around sort of staff oracy, and sort of staff, you know, what role the staff play and all that sort of thing. I'd really like to dig into that. But before we do that, I just want to mention our sponsors tonight, who are John Catt Educational, who are leading publishers of professional development books and resources around the world. And they are a fantastic sponsor on Teachers Talk Radio. So thank you, John Catt. And you can use the code JCTTR2425 to get 20% off any book on the John Catt website, which is johncattbookshop.com. So yeah, head over there. And thank you, John Catt, for always supporting Teachers Talk Radio. And yeah, I wanted to ask you next, Louise, which I sort of touched on, about staff. I mean, one of the things I wanted to ask first of all is, you mentioned something interesting, which is that, you know, developing staff oracy, right? Yeah. Does that factor? I mean, I was quite interested and intrigued when you mentioned that, because where does that fit in with this? How does it fit in with this?
I feel like it's one of those things that depends why you're doing oracy. Like, are we doing it just to improve student outcomes, be they academic or personal? Or actually, if we're doing that, if we're thinking about it in terms of the personal development, why are we not extending that opportunity to staff? Because actually it makes total sense. If we've got staff and we're trying to say to them, do oracy. Oracy is really important. It needs to be threaded into all of your lessons. Plan it in your curriculum. It feels like more workload. And we're like, why are we going back to our curriculum to add that in? Like, really sell this to me. And I feel like if you're going to ask staff to do something, they have to feel it. They have to want to do it. They need the culture of buy-in. And I feel the best way to do that is to train staff in it, is to give them personal and professional opportunities to benefit from this, because that's where you'll get the hearts and the minds buy-in. It's, oh, this has worked for me. I now feel more confident standing at the front of the room or moving around the room and talking about the lesson from different points in the room. I feel like I understand that if I hover over a student as I'm talking to them, that feels like an uncomfortable power dynamic. And I now have a better relationship with that student because I don't do that. And if you really train staff in it and you kind of build their confidence, that's where the culture of buy-in comes from. It no longer just becomes a vision that we're looking at. It's a vision that staff are living and breathing. And when they see the outcomes and feel the outcomes for themselves, they then want to do it for the students. It's not just something we're doing as a CPD initiative, as a one-off thing.
Sure. And that training for the staff then, have you led that personally? Have you done any of that? Or
no. No, that's something that we're moving into in September. with our new external provider. Simon's kind of led us through training. Like I said, we've had a few sessions with him, and we've had conversations. He's come to visit us. But to be honest, we've gone straight to the resources and the students because we wanted something more tangible, because we do need to improve, I think, some of our outcomes, and we're working on that pathway to excellence at Weavers. So we did need really quick, and it was a pilot project, and I was quite lucky in the sense that, you know, I good relationships with these other heads of departments. So we already had the buy-in, but I think if we were then going to extend that out, which is the plan for us next year, we then need to think about how we then cultivate that buy-in and how it actually benefits our staff first. So that's where we need to be slightly more strategic, I think, in our thinking, and that's our next stage. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, how did you link Oracy development to your whole school approach to modelling in the classroom? Because you mentioned modelling as well. So how does that fit in?
So we with our CPD, we embed it over years. We don't just have one-off inset days where we're like, oh, look, mini whiteboards, and that's it. We do have, you know, woven threads that do tie in with where we want to be in terms of our outcomes and our student and staff development. And like I said, one of the ones we've been working on for the past year and a half has been live modelling with students. And we're not expecting to see live modelling in every single lesson because, you know, as you've rightly pointed out, there are time constraints and sometimes that's not appropriate. But we then thought, okay, Oracy shouldn't ever be a separate initiative. So we've tied it in with modelling and things like mini whiteboards, which we've already been doing for the past 2 years. So they all come together because Oracy literally underpins all of our other CPD initiatives. So it kind of threads in. So, for example, when we're doing the modelling, the teacher will be at the board, they'll be thinking about their exposition, they'll be thinking about narrating their metacognitive processes, they'll be identifying misconceptions as they go through. They're literally thinking out loud as they're planning, for example, an exam answer. And then they'll invite questions from students. And then we'll move into the we do stage, where students will be taken into structured turning talk with a partner, where they've got assigned roles and sentence starters, as we talked about. And then we then feed back as a class in a structured way, using the language and the sentences we've been using. And then we then essentially consolidate planning. And then they then move into the you do stage, where they'll have guided exam practice using all the things they have just verbalized.
Do you think that takes a bit of confidence for a teacher in that sense to embark on sort of modelling and verbally talking about their cognitive processes with the students? Do you think it requires confidence or simply going for it?
No, I think I can only speak from my brain's point of view. And social sciences is quite a critical thinking subject. So we're used to picking apart our thinking from all angles all the time. I know lots of subjects do that. But then, you know, I think you're quite right. Staff may feel unconfident doing that, because narrating things out loud, sometimes your brain's just automatically doing it. It's a non-declarative process. You know, sometimes it becomes a bit like breathing. You don't declaratively think about it, you just do it. You're like, well, this is the equation, and then you do this, and then you do this. And you don't then narrate, oh, but you could also be thinking this is a problem at this point. But my brain then thinks, that won't be the answer because of this. So that, you're quite right, it does require confidence, and it does require deliberate practice in your CPD sessions to give staff a chance to think, what am I actually thinking as I plan this? Because it's that fallacy, isn't it, where you've been doing something for years and you think this is really easy, and you forget what it's like to not know the things that you're teaching. So therefore you don't declaratively think about it, you don't narrate it out loud. So I think you're right, it does require confidence, and it requires deliberate practice and rehearsal.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that, again, coming back to what you mentioned earlier, I mean, I started similar time frame to you about 18 years ago. And at that sort of time, 2007-8, that was pretty foreign in the sense there wasn't any sort of conversations about, hey, you know, disclose your thinking in front of the class, and, you know, almost have a conversation with yourself about your own process, and then they can get involved in that and gain something from it. I mean, that I don't recall that really being talked about. It was more about, you instruct, you tell them what to do in the best way you can, and then they do it, you know. And I actually agree it can be really powerful. In history, I will sometimes start from scratch on an essay question with the students there, without having already planned it in advance. So then the whole planning process sort of is talk through, and my mistakes, delete, I'll start again there, and then they can sort of see, when I'm struggling or when I'm coming across something that's difficult. I think with the Oracy element, do you envisage staff sort of thinking about the way they listen to students as well?
Yes, yeah, I think that's a key part of the Oracy. It's not just the verbal, it is the listening and the comprehension.
Sure.
And then working with what you've heard. And I think most staff, particularly experienced staff, will just be in the habit of, you're going to ask a question, you can probably predict all the different answers that are probably going to come in. It's rare that if you've been teaching, for example, as long as you have 18 years in, it's rare that you'll get an answer you're like, oh gosh. So you kind of know the answer you're coming in, so then you know automatically what the next question is to push their thinking on. But I think for me, in my early stages of my career, if I rewound a bit, I would have to, plan that Socratic questioning to really push the thinking. And I think that ties in well with, I know many schools, as we're going down the route of instructional coaching, so you can really think about what that particular staff member needs. Do they need to think about questioning techniques? Are they then listening to what the student says and then changing or adapting the next question that happens? Or are they automatically just reeling off the 3 questions they were already going to ask prior to the lesson starting? Because you're right, it does need to be adaptive. It needs to be, this student said this. All right, okay, that's the answer. No, that means push it. Or can someone else in the classroom push that? If I ping pong that over to my, my grade 7 student, how are you going to improve that answer? Okay, now you ping pong that over to someone over there who's a grade 8 student. How are you going to improve that answer? What vocab are they now missing? And when they get stuck, you then scaffold in with your questions like, what vocab are you missing? What vocab did they use that they shouldn't really have because it's from a different theory?
Sure. I wanted to sort of touch on instructional coaching as well, and sort of using that as a tool to, as part of this. First of all, for people who don't know, because we'll have audiences here from, I know we have, lots of teachers in Iran, and I think Iran is our 4th biggest audience actually on our podcast. So there may be teachers in Iran, because instructional coaching is all the buzz, isn't it, at the moment in the UK? But yeah. I wonder if maybe you can just outline what that is in simple terms, and how you sort of use it as a tool to improve Oracy with staff members, or as part of this program, or in any way, really.
So the whole premise of instructional coaching is it's a one-to-one. So there'll be a coach and a coachee, and you've got to think about who you're going to assign together. But in our school, we're assigning largely on obviously expertise subject, and obviously professional expertise in general. But the idea is that you will meet fortnightly, and your coach will come in and just dip into a lesson for 10-15 minutes. It's not a full lesson observation. It's a low stakes, coming in and seeing what you're already teaching. They're not expecting to see rewind years back, a whiz bang full observation, panic, I've done 50,000 activities. It's just, we want to see what you're doing every day, and then essentially go away. And with instructional coaching, there are particular ways that you structure the meeting with your coachee. So you actually plan the things you're going to say in advance. You think about, so if I kind of hark back to Josh Goodrich's responsive coaching book, he talks about the stages of instructional coaching. And you're thinking about whether students are paying attention. At what stage are you optimizing communication? At what stage are you driving thought? At what stage is there consolidation? And so what you do as a coach, you go in for that 10-15 minutes, the low stakes, just seeing what's already happening in the average lesson for that coachee. And you literally think about those stages of the lesson and the stages of cognition for students. And you then target things that you think they might then want to work on. And then you then go back and plan your meeting in a very structured way. And you have, there are things like praise and prompt. There are ways that you deliver the feedback that's very specific. And what is really important is the coachee has an element of autonomy. So it's not just, here's a learning walk, here's some feedback, this was great, you need to work on this. It is a peer-led conversation, a professional dialogue with, I noticed this was really positive, your stage 3 optimizing communication was really effective because you did this and you did this, and the students then learned this. But you're also then inviting them and saying, okay, I noticed this and this, which one would you like to focus on? And you make it really specific. So for example, with the Oracy opportunities, if you're targeting optimizing communication, you might say, I noticed that your exposition in this particular lesson wasn't particularly clear. I didn't know why, as a student, you were introducing, I don't know, the Battle of Hastings. I couldn't link it to my previous learning, and therefore I didn't sink into my long-term memory. So wherefore, what can we do? Or what can we change in your delivery? And you then decide what you're going to change. And it has to be one thing you're going to do, and it has to be very specific. And it's not an overhaul of a whole lesson. It may just be designing into your lesson, I will specifically say these words. This links to our previous learning when we've talked about Normans, or we've talked about a previous royal family in France, and therefore why they then invaded. That kind of thing. And the important part of instructional coaching is you then give a chance for that coachee to practice that with you. The rehearsal part is really important, because I think it's really easy to kind of get lost in translation. Is that, we're going to do this. And a colleague might say, oh, yes, I definitely want to work on that. I'm going to do that. But then they haven't had time to practice it. So they don't feel confident. And you've mentioned confidence as being important, to then go back and take that into their classroom. And the chances are it might not happen at all. And if it does, it might not be effective. So the coach has that rehearsal with you. And I think that's a really important part. And then essentially at the end of that process, the coach will go back in a week's time, whenever that the coachee wants them to come and see. Again, a low stakes observation, seeing that particular thing that you've asked them to work on.
I mean, do you envisage, and again, you're sort of, in some ways, you're in the process when it comes to Oracy across the school, rather than at the end of it. You're in the middle of this process. But do you envisage that it will improve communication across the whole school? Do you envisage, actually sort of more effective communication in the school, in classrooms? Where does it end? I
don't think it does end. That's the thing. We're definitely at the starting point. I don't think it should be ending. There's always something we can be doing to improve communication as staff, students, but you should see if it's being done effectively and it's been planned in and it's been delivered and reflected on, particularly if you've then got a coach coming in with instructional coaching and you're saying, I'm particularly working on this. And that then becomes a routine in your classroom. If that becomes a routine in your classroom, in many different classrooms in school, not only does the outcomes, the learning increase, but also the behaviour changes, because students then know how to talk to each other. They know that it's important to turn and face each other. Or even if you're talking about methods of communication, there'll be times when you're thinking, do I write a letter with a letterhead in an English lesson? Or is it better to send a quick email? Or, for in health and social care, you put them into vocational situations as a GP. This is your case study. Would you go and meet that person? Would you have a phone conversation? Would you email? So it's also choosing your appropriate method and thinking about, is that the most appropriate method? And what might be the outcomes of doing a different method? So if we're teaching that to our students, it automatically becomes something we start doing as staff. And I think for me personally, that's something I realised only in the past couple of years, really. I think, when you've got busy timetablers, you're like, I need to send something out to my team. And you're like, right, here's a new thing we need to do. And you send it out and you're like, oh, well, that hasn't landed well, because I should really have invested the time at break time to go find them, to ask their thoughts on this thing that I've just sent out and expected them to kind of suck it up. But for me, that's something I've learned in recent years, but that's something we can then teach to our students.
Do you know what the solution is to that?
What?
Just ChatGPT it.
Lord love it, ChatGPT.
Just type in, make this sound polite.
Do you know what I need to get? I need to get into that.
I can see now stuff that's been GPT generated from like 50 miles away. I'm like, GPT generated from it always uses deep dive, and let's take a deep dive. Let's dive into this. It always uses a double slash instead of a single slash. No idea why.
Does it use the classic teacherisms like really run with this and add another string to your bow? Or does it not?
But it's got its own isms. It's got its own things that it just always does. I could probably think of others if I did, but once you've run 100 or 200 prompts through it, you realize that you can see. But yeah,
I've never actually used. I've not used it for that.
Maybe that is the solution. I don't know. Maybe that is. I mean, for sure, it's handy if, with communications, to run it through there and say, okay, how does this sound?
Yeah. As
a sounding board. It's quite good in that sense. But it comes back to Oracy, though, in the sense that, I guess we're entering a world where, a lot of communication now is done online. A lot of communication is done via avatars. I mean, in the future, who knows if people will physically even be in Zoom meetings, right? I mean, already they're starting to sort of technologize that experience. So, and with AI and everything else developing, how fast it is, why do you think Oracy is still really, really important?
Because it's personal expression. It's like you say, you've worked with AI so much, so you can instantly see a communication that's come through. And I know there's a lot of conversation on Twitter at the moment about AI generated posts. Communication is meant to be a unique voice. And if you're using things like ChatGPT, it can be really for things like writing policies or sending out a generic email to lots of different parents, and it doesn't require character. But so much of Oracy is expressing yourself and seeing the world through your eyes and articulating your ideas and your emotions. And if we then go down that route of AIing things, it's really good, like you say, for seeing how could somebody interpret this. But I tend to do that with my line manager. If I'm unsure about something, I'm like, how will this play out? How could somebody else perceive this? Because I'm neurodivergent, so my brain will take a short email and I'll be like, oh, look, black and white, perfect, it's in bullet points, yay. But somebody else will be like, oh, that was impersonal. So I think it is good to run things by people or even AI. But I think for me, I don't think we'll ever go down that route of Oracy not being important, because AI will never, it might get the voice, it might learn my voice. But if you really want to have effective communication, it's got to be clear that it's come from you and it's come from your mind and your heart and you believe it, whatever it is that you're expressing. And I think you lose the meaning if something else generates the message for you.
I think that's really powerful. And I mostly agree. I mean, we've done shows on Teachers Talk Radio about, things like creativity and AI, and it would be interesting to sort of further explore Oracy and AI in the sense of, in the sense of how it maybe has changed or is changing things in that respect. I mean, do you think like we started at a similar time? Do you think that levels of Oracy have sort of faded, or do you think they just are what they are? Do you think they've increased or improved over the years? And it's a generic thing, isn't it? We come across hundreds and hundreds of kids. It's difficult to say, this is the overall thing that's happened, but certainly, COVID obviously had some sort of impact on the way students, the way they interacted with each other, the way they interacted with the world, the way they interacted with us as adults, as teachers. It's undoubtedly it had some sort of, it had an impact on that, and other things have had an impact, like mobile phones, like the internet, like AI now. There's lots of influences, isn't there? But what do you think? Do you think it's fundamentally changed, or do you think it just is what it is and we work with it?
I think it has fundamentally changed. It's definitely changed. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've had emails from students being like, all right, and then you get text speak, and I'm like, no, that's not how you word a professional email to to anybody. And you have to have those conversations. So it isn't, I think the baseline has changed. I think the fundamentals are still there, but because, like you've talked about COVID, so they had the 3 or 4 years where we had numerous lockdowns, and it changed the way we interacted, and a lot of our learning moved online, or became device based. And then you've got students and young people having their own devices like iPads, things like gaming and interacting on there, or they've got video games and they're kind of playing these live games and interacting at the same time and talking about the game they're playing. And mobile phones, you've got lots of shortened versions of words. You just think, I don't even know what they mean. So it has, I don't think it's necessarily fundamentally changed, but it has definitely changed, and the younger generations coming through are having to adapt. And it's, I think, about schools finding a way to kind of make that work for the younger generation, because as you touched upon, the workplace is becoming increasingly online and digitalized. So when we're talking about things like, I know we're going to a different topic area here, but like, banning devices in schools, there's lots of pros and cons to them. But, one of the biggest cons is actually that's our society now. And should we be teaching students how to effectively communicate on those devices and when to put those devices away and turn them off, rather than just blanket banning them? Because when they go out into the world, there won't be a blanket ban. They will still have their phones on in the office. But it's different. I can see pros and cons of the argument. But yeah, it's an interesting topic.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Capel Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to capelprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
I can 100% see the pros and cons to it. I mean, one of the things that's interesting is you talked about body language and sort of responses as part of Oracy, and that is something that I think that's even more marked is maybe students not knowing the cues as much anymore, because they are coming up in this online world. They just have far less interaction with other human beings. I mean, I bet if they did some sort of survey, which someone's probably already done, in terms of the amount of interaction with human beings that a young person has in, say, 1995 versus now, I reckon it would be like in hours. I think it would be greatly reduced from what it was then. But I might be just
as in-person interactions. Do you mean?
I mean, so let's say they said between the ages of 8 and 16. Or 18, let's say 16. Between the ages of 8 and 16, how many hours have you spent in the company of other human beings? Now, to be fair, when I was a teenager, we had games consoles. So we were still spending time on games consoles. But I have to say that was you think about, I don't know, multiplayer on N64 or PlayStation, you couldn't play it online. You had to have your friends round to play multiplayer on the N64, right? And the dream was always to have 4 people, so you had 4 people on the multiplayer. Right, so straight away, you're still in a room with other human beings, you're still interacting with them. There's no online gaming. So, I mean, you could play it on your own, of course. But that's my point. It would be interesting, a comparative study of how many hours a child spends on average with other human beings between the ages of, say, 6, 8, and 16.
Yeah.
From now to like 95.
We know there have been lots of studies in psychology, particularly around device use. I remember we hark back to like the James Bulger case, many years ago. That obviously sparked a lot of, research into the effect of devices, not just on interaction, but on particular things like relationships. And actually, overwhelming evidence proved that it wasn't what you watched that affected your communication and your relationships. It was literally the amount of hours you had. And there was a direct correlation between the amount of hours you spent on a device and the levels of aggression that you then displayed. So you could have literally been watching, I don't know, Tots TV, God, that's ages ago, or like Teletubbies or whatever. It made no difference. You're watching hours and hours and hours of that. Your aggression levels would then increase. And like it does link back to, like you say, because you're not building relationships real time with people. You're not having to see the real time consequences of your communication decisions. And that's why you get things like the rise of, people, keyboard warriors, as we call them, because they don't see the consequences of their communication. So it doesn't feel real. And so when you try and take that out to the real world and people say those things, there's a breakdown in communication there because you can't talk to people like that. It doesn't work. You're not going to get a great response if you just say the criticism you've just typed online to somebody in person. But yeah, you're right. It's a really interesting point about even things like gaming has changed. Back in the days of Sega, like you say, you'd sit in the room and you'd still be with people, but now it's online and you're then interacting with people you don't know, and how that changes the dynamic.
Sure, exactly.
Mm.
Listen, Louise, we've been through a big conversation there. Just to finish off, then, if you're a teacher, let's separate this between teacher and leader. So let's start with teacher. If you're a teacher in the classroom who is thinking, right, I want to get serious about Oracy in my classroom from September. I want to make a bit of a go of this. What's the one change or thing they could do that would be an easy win from September, that would be almost a tip for the teacher?
I think it would be, and the thing that I found easiest this year as the team would be the structuring your turn and talks. So when you've got paired activities or group activities, assigning specific roles to each student, and then giving them specific sentences linked to the way that they will then write with those sentences, giving them aspirational vocabulary that they can then choose from, to then also include in their answer. And then modelling that with particularly, with a member of staff first, showing them how it happens. Having that displayed on the board, those sentence starters, the aspirational vocabulary, having your timer set up for 5 minutes to have clear turn taking, and then circulating around as it happens and celebrating the wins as it's happening. That would be my one, I think, key takeaway of a really quick, easy win.
Brilliant. And then from a leadership point of view, what, if there was, let's say, somebody from a senior leadership point of view, I want to focus on Oracy development, what might be the thing that they should avoid doing, and maybe the thing that they should consider doing?
I think, as you know, when it comes from a senior leadership point of view, your context is key. So we can just talk about Oracy until the cows come home and say, oh, this works for this school and this works for this school. There needs to be, as with any initiative, an assessment of what Oracy is in your school first, in your context, and about what you want it to look like in line with your vision for your students, for your staff, and how it already ties into what you're already doing. We don't want to increase workload. We don't one-off inset days where staff and students don't buy into it. It needs to be, what does my school need? What do my students and staff need? Do like a valid data analysis of where the state of play is, and then decide where do we want it to be, and therefore how are we then going to get there, and how are we going to weave that in for the next few years? Because as we know, sustainable growth, it needs to be gradual, and it's not just one inset day in September and then come back to it next year. It needs to be built into existing processes and analysis and reflection.
Brilliant. Listen, before we say our goodbyes, it would be remiss of me to not mention again John Catt. Thank you so much for sponsoring us, John Catt. Visit John Cat Bookshop, johncatbookshop.com. Grab yourself a book. Use JCTTR2425. Get 20% off. Also, Louise, have you heard of the Chalk and Talk podcast? Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't. Tell me about it.
Well, it's a podcast by Anna Stokey, who you can find on LinkedIn, or X, and she's actually based in Canada, but she's got a great podcast. It's primarily evidence-informed practice, so she has people discussing different elements of evidence. It's well worth checking out. It's called the Chalk and Talk podcast, so definitely one that TTR recommends there if you want another podcast.
That sounds really good. Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah, definitely. I'll look into that.
And finally, our newsletter. Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, ttradio.org/newsletter. That's not to you, Louise. That's to everybody out there. You know,
everyone.
You have to subscribe to our newsletter following this. Not saying that, but everybody can subscribe.
Oh, no, I will. I'll be
at ttradio.org/newsletter for 4 of our favourite shows from the week gone by on Teachers Talk Radio, and lots more besides. Yeah, more TTR shows coming up this weekend. Louise, thank you ever so much for your time this evening to discuss Oracy. It's been great. Loads of really great takeaways for me, but also any other teacher who's been watching along. We've had 350 people tune in live. So thank you very much, Louise. And we'll speak again. And somebody has just made a comment. Victoria. Thank you for joining us, Victoria. So I've missed a few comments here. The King of Debs says, how do you overcome the issue of idea generation? Debs, it's too late, right? We can't solve the issue of AI and idea generation right now. There's too much. Old Man Teacher says
that's another podcast.
Yeah, it's amazing how much time or lack of it and poor management of it impacts on everything that we do. Sure, totally agree with you. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Debs. Thank you, Old Man Teacher, for joining us this evening. And everybody else who has checked in on this conversation, really, really appreciate it. We'll be back soon, and take care.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.